Hello, YouTube. This is Brian Foster, and I'm coming to you today. And we're talking more about the book Gone West. And this, of course, is by J.S.M. who was a medium and was brought to different portions of the spirit world. And he has written a book about it. Now, I have a link to that book. It's in PDF on my down below in the description. I also have a lot more information on my site, NW Spiritism, so you can go there and find out a lot more about Spiritism. But today we're talking about the refuge in hell. In fact, we went through like the schools in hell last week, and now we're going to the refuge in hell, and then later on we'll talk about a college that not in hell, in the spirit world. But now we'll start with this. Before I begin, please subscribe, hit the bell button, and let us know, help us spread Spiritism throughout the world. We need it. We're moving from a planet of atonement to a planet of regeneration, and we need people to become more loving, selfless, charitable, and fraternal, and honest in their dealings with each other. Let's get into it. So this is, of course, our wonderful author, and he says that he went to a trance on the night of the 23rd of March, 1914. He said, I found myself standing beside H.J.L. That was his father-in-law, who had died earlier, and he's kind of been his guide throughout his sojourns in the spirit world. So he said, I found myself standing beside H.J.L. on an expanse of open grass. And he said, I've recently been to see the House of Refuge. You'll remember that I was not allowed to see that at first. He goes, yes, I remember. He goes, well, having come through the darkness by a road such as those I have previously described, but not the same as either, I entered the roof in the courtyard as before. There was a school here also, but this time I crossed the quad at an angle and passing under a classical or Renaissance doorway entered a passage. I should say that the building was in the Renaissance, but not the perpendicular style. And from the passage, we passed through a door into a large room, which was empty save for a few couches and a table in the center. And this is what my guide told me. This room forms the anteroom for the school. The spirits who are ready to be taken in are admitted here. They are often very weak and are at first placed under the guidance and control of a special teacher. Now, let me refresh everyone's memory. He is actually in an outpost created by the spirit world, spirits who have been, actually mostly reside into heaven. They come down to this outpost. This is below the umbral or the lower zone, which is below the crust of the earth, is what the Spiritism says is the dark abyss, or this person is saying hell, although there is no such thing as hell. It's more like a purgatory where you're there just until you change your attitude and your character. There's no defined time limit. And until you're ready to get out and say, oh, this is not the life for me, then you can get out. So they're down in this outpost. And of course, the outposts all have walls around them because there are many, not very nice, violent spirits around that want to take over territory and enslave other spirits. Not a good place to be. So they try to protect anyone that comes in there. Now, a lot of these people, when he's talking about students, there will be spirits that will go, good spirits will go down into this dark abyss and help people that know they want to get help. A lot of times they really need help to ascend because they'll ask for it, they're ready for it, but it's physically very hard because you have these other dominating spirits around them. Let me carry on what he said. So they're under the guidance and control of a special teacher. He or she watches over them for the whole time, and only after a while are they deemed sufficiently strong to attend the proper classes. They need individual attention at first. Then he asks a question, are they kept here for the whole time? He goes, no, this is the room which connects up school and refugee home. It's sort of an isolation ward. After a time, as soon as they're strong enough to get about properly, they're taken to a sort of study, one for each pupil and his teacher. See. So he led me out of the room into the corridor through a doorway opposite. Here I found a much smaller room, and in it was a bright male spirit, and on a couch a small misshapen child. The bright spirit was playing on a harp a beautiful, soothing hymn. Music soothes pain, and that unfortunate one is suffering terrible mental pain, said my guide. We entered another study, and here another exhausted spirit was being treated. What is he doing? I asked, indicating the bright spirit who was making signs over the body of the patient. My guide replied, he is lending him some of his magnetic fluid. The patient is weak in willpower, and the spirit is treating him. This method is analogous to that of a magnetic healer on Earth. So let me stop there for a second. What they're talking about is what Spiritism call giving passes. And it's also, you see this done in Reiki, where they'll lay their hands in energy. So what Spiritism tells us exactly how passes work. Now, here in the spirit world, a spirit gives him some of his magnetic fluid. But here in our incarnate, in our world, what happens is, and I've been to these in the Spiritist meetings. So if you're in a Spiritist meeting, you go to a meeting and you go to a talk. And then when the talk is over, some subject could be, heaven, could be how to make yourself, more spiritual, whatever it could be. Then usually what happens is you go to a room and there are chairs in the room. It's kind of very subdued lighting, and there's a person next to each chair. And you walk into the room and you sit down, and that person that comes in front of you, and then you close your eyes, you get your mind clear, and that person will wave their hands up and down you. Now, what's happening, which you don't see, is there is a spirit behind that medium. Then that spirit is taking his energy, using the medium to change his energy into what is customized for you, the patient, let's say, the target. And that's why he's using another human to modify that energy, which they call universal fluid, which makes up everything. And then it helps restore your harmony and your vibrations. Now, if you've ever had that done, you can feel it. I mean, I can feel the energy around me. It's like static electricity, or it's like your nerves are on end. You just feel that power. And it's kind of what I feel a lot of times when I feel that there's spirits around. And it's funny because I talked to another medium at a different time, and he was saying he can see spirits. And when he was one of the ones giving passes, right, to people, he said he could see the spirits. And the spirits, it's just they move so fast. They move like robots. And as soon as someone comes into the room, because they'll let like maybe 5 or 10 people, at least the center I'm at, there'll be like 10 people into the room. A spirit like starts leading that person to the right chair, because they'll know what medium they want to use in order to give him the right amount of fluid. Of course, me being me, the next time I went, I looked at a chair and then I went to a different one, just because I'm stupid, right? And I probably ended up in the one I should have been anyway, because you can't fool those, you can't fool them. But, I just wanted to see kind of what would happen if I was forced, or I just, I looked at that one, then I went to another one. Probably that was always in my mind, but anyway. So that's what's happening and it really, I think it does help. In fact, when I've been to a healer in another city in Brazil, and they'll do more than passes. They'll actually, they won't do anything invasive, but they'll just touch you, and you can feel the power coming from their hands. It's amazing. Of course, I just want to make sure, always use your doctor, always go to your physician, take your medicine. The spirit world doesn't say, oh, we're going to have these miracle cures, because Spiritism says there is no miracle. There's always a reason for it. But always, the spirit world knows what type of medicine is available here, but there's no harm in supplementing what's happening and what you take here to, getting passes at the Spiritist Center, or going to one of these healing centers in Brazil. So I want to make sure you understand that. So then I'll carry on. So then we returned to the anteroom and passed through a door at the opposite end. This led into the house of refuge proper. We found ourselves in a kind of hospital ward. There were no bedclothes on the bed, so if I can call them, and on these lay tiny children. Now, the most extraordinary thing about it was the children who were nearest the door through which we had entered, right, were by far the most active and strong, yet they were the smallest. As we moved toward the opposite end of the dormitory, where there was another door, I noticed the children grew larger and larger, but at the same time, they seemed more flabby, dark, and indistinct. Now, my guide said, okay, I'll explain this to you. These spirits, when in hell, appeared tall, fixed, and strong. The more evil they were, the stronger they were. Their spiritual bodies were made of evil and darkness, just as ours are made of goodness and light. When, however, they begin to repent and come here, the evil principle within them grows weaker and weaker, and as it does, so the real spiritual body develops slowly. Thus, at first, these rescued spirits grow weaker and weaker, then they become as little children in very truth. Once this has happened, they are able to go on to the school where they begin to grow again, though often very slowly. So again, you see this in Spiritism, where there'll be stories by the Reverend J.S.M of spirits going down. And there's this one story where this band of higher spirits came into the city, and they walked into the city, and they were actually at that time, and this is a city down in the lower zone. And at that time, they were invisible. They hadn't made themselves more dense, right? Because the higher the spirit, the more energy, less matter. And of course, the lower the spirit, the more matter and energy. So the ratio is different. So they go in there, and on this, and they went into like this big theater. And at the stage was the leader of the city, and there's this big, strong guy. And he's strong. It's like he says, they were strong and fixed because they were focused in what they wanted to do. Now, it was not good. In fact, Spiritism really doesn't like to use the word evil, but he had a wrong focus. And he was actually talking to the people in the city, saying, how, the higher levels, they're just a bunch of sheep. They don't know what they're doing. You should follow me, etc. It was, it's very wrong. But he was just trying to brainwash people and magnetize people, saying that, follow me. You need to be part of my group. You don't want to have anything to do with these better spirits. And of course, he appeared really good. And the people in the audience, they thought they had their best clothes on. Of course, to these spirits, because, the higher spirits, they see people as they are, and they were like misshapen. Their clothes were in tatters. But to them in that theater, they probably thought they looked pretty good. So those spirits came, and this leader of the city was talking to him, and then the spirits behind him said, okay, stop this. What you're saying is totally wrong. And the guy, moved about and said, he saw once they were advanced spirits. So this is the interesting part. He just immediately said, oh, you're very welcome, because he knew it's like a superhero against a kindergartner. There's just nothing these people and these spirits in hell they can do to a higher spirit. In fact, another episode one time is one of these guys had this big sword, right? And a high spirit just went there and just touched the sword. The guy withdrew the sword, and then it just bent over like a leaf. And they can just do whatever they want. There's nothing. There's not even a contest of wills. So what happens is these people are evil and focused. Once they decide that, oh, it's not so good being equal, then they because everyone has good and bad. There's no all evil or all bad, right? Or all good, actually, unless you're really, really high. But at least within our realms, it's always a mixture. So then they start thinking, they lose their focus of their foundation of their life, and they become smaller because they're actually becoming nicer, right? And they're actually trying to be more humble and understanding, and they know what they did was wrong, and their outward appearance to the higher spirits makes them appear that way. So this is how they were here in the city. They appeared like little children, and as they'll grow bigger and bigger, as they become more comfortable and have more faith in their new foundation of love and light. So let me carry on with what they're saying here. So they asked, well, where do they get this element of light from which the spiritual body developed? And he replied, even men in hell retain some little spark of spiritual truth. They cannot help it, for it is implanted by God. And of course, this is what Spiritism says. Everyone has good, and bad in them. And so they won't lose it. It is a divine, and I'll carry on, is a divine element in all, however much it may be submerged, can never be quite extinguished. Even in hell, men learn in spite of their evil will. Absolutely. Thus they learn that death does not end life. Often they wish it did. And once they begin to grow better, they grow weaker, and so hell becomes more and more hateful to them. For in hell, the strongest is he who is most wicked, and the strongest oppresses and cruelly ill treats those who are weaker than he, and there is no death to intervene. And that is, again, very true. There is no death. And so think about the genius of God and the spirit realm. So how does, these people are evil and they go into this hell. So how does the spirit realm fight evil or fight badness or fight ignorance? They put them in places like this. They go, okay, this is what you want. This is what you get. And then they decide for themselves, like, this is not a very good idea. People are treating me as I treated others. And then they start changing their personality. Now, we're told over and over again by the spirit world is the earth, when you're incarnated, it's a much more efficient, better place to change your character and personality for the good. In places like this, it takes a lot longer. So that's why you want to study, you want to understand why you need to improve, why you're in a physical body, because we're all set up. We can't see much around us. We don't see other spirits. We're not that bright, but we are very emotional, and we have all the stimuli coming at us, and it's perfect to change our character and for us to understand what doesn't work and what works emotionally to us. So let me carry on. Then he asked, is there pain then in hell? And the answer is yes. It's only mental and spiritual suffering, but to the souls there, it is as real as physical suffering is on earth. Again, thought is action. If you think you're suffering, you are suffering. I'll carry on. Just as here the earth on which we stand, though immaterial to the physical world, seems real and material to us. Yes, they suffer, but no friendly death comes to end the anguish of the wretched victims. The old descriptions of hell through to the modern world, they seem gross and materialistic. In reality, not so very inaccurate. They were rough hewn and couched in materialistic language, but much of the apparent materialistic detail is due to two facts. Firstly, to the spirit that experiences seem as materialistic as men's do to them. Secondly, many of the finer distinctions made by spirits have failed to penetrate the medium's brain, whereas the more materialistic obtained a ready reception. So then he asked, well, then there were mediums long ago through whom spirits in hell could send messages? And the answer was certainly. And further, at times, men who were still alive have been able to visit these realms when their bodies were in a trance and carry back some recollection of what goes on there here. Dante is perhaps the finest exponent of this kind of revelation. So then Dante's great work is not a mere figment of his poetic brain based on his own religious views. The answer is no, it's a real revelation seen in the trance state, but molded into its present shape by the poetic imagination and slightly colored by the preconceived religious views of the medium. These changes took place when he set to work to put it in literary form. He had no misunderstanding of the facts immediately after he returned to the normal state. And of course, these visions of hell is very interesting, even Dante's state, and what you read about in these lower zones are quite frightening. And that where you can actually see where people take on animal-like characteristics, probably where people, the whole mythology of werewolves and things like that came from. But even people who had near-death experiences, a small percentage will go into a hell, right? a purgatory type farm, and they'll see horrible, horrible things, and it will scare the heck out of them, right? And anyone, I always say, anyone who's had near death experiences, it's kind of the same as you were in middle school or junior high, and the VP took you out of class and said, "Okay, you've got things to do. Let's talk about it," right? So then they go back into life, which is back to the class, and hopefully they've got a better realization of what they should be doing. So let me continue. So he sees me passed out of the room to another. And here we found spirits just as they came in from hell. Rescuers were constantly arriving, bringing some poor, unfortunate being with them. These they handed over to others who received them kindly, reasoned with them, and urged them to undergo medical treatment. It was not always easy to persuade them to do this, and even while I was there, several went out of the house of refuge back to hell. Perfect freedom is the law here, and if a man wishes to be foul, foul he will be. Of course, again, he's saying free will is respected. We have free will. We can make the stupidest decision we can possibly make, and that's our responsibility. When people ask me and email me saying, "Okay, why is there so much evil and chaos and inequality in this world?" And I say, well, it's two words, or you could say one word with the hyphen: free will. Because we have the freedom to be that way to each other. And then you add free will to the laws of karma and reincarnation, and people are paying for their past mistakes and have to go through tough trials. That's why you have all the seemingly chaos and inequality and all those terrible things. But it's all made, right? It's all made for us to be better, more perfect spirits at the end. It's like you were looking at a seventh grade class of kids high on all their hormones, and you think, how could they ever become decent adults? And yet they do, right? Because life gives them the hard knocks and the good times, and most of them become pretty good adults. The same way with us, but the time frame is measured not in hours and weeks and months and years, but in eons. Just a small difference. So I'll carry on. I noticed that the magnetic healing seemed to be very largely employed in this stage, and the whole air seemed filled with particles of darkness given off by the lost spirits undergoing treatment. We passed through another door into a comparatively small anteroom in which various newcomers were waiting, attended by their rescuers, and at the further end was a great door. As I approached it, I was aware of a living terror, awful and tangible but real, and knew that it lay beyond that door. As we drew nearer and nearer to it, the nameless terror seemed to grip my soul and numb it. I would have turned and fled, but my guide urged me to go forward. Now we stood in front of it, and suddenly it was flung open, and a rescuer in his charge sprang in. The terror seemed to flow in with the darkness. I cowered back against my guide. Quickly the door closed too. Yet in that brief instant, I saw quite plainly that the fugitives had been pursued up to the very door itself. I heard the wild yell of baffled fury and hate as the pursuers found themselves kept back by the wall of good thoughts, which they could not penetrate. How was it, I asked my guide, that the pursuers were not able to prevent this man reaching safety? And he says, each rescuer carries around him a wall of faith and good thoughts, which these evil spirits cannot penetrate unless he himself makes a breach in it by giving way to any of these temptations with which they will attempt to lure him back. The poor lost soul, if he really desires to progress, can, with the permission of the rescuer, pass within this wall and so be safe. But if the rescuer refuses, he cannot. And if while protected with it, he ceases to desire to progress, he will be at once driven out and so fall a victim to his pursuers. Often and often this does happen, and that is why those who take up this work must be gifted with the greatest patience. After one has striven so hard and risked so much, it is indeed hard to see the fruits of victory torn from our very grasp. Now think of this. There's like 22 billion spirits in heavens and around the world. there's a little bit more than 7 billion of incarnates. So there's, let's say 14 billion, uh, 15 billion of incarnates in the lower zone and in heaven. Now, Chico Xavier said that only about 30% of the people who die actually will go to one of the levels of heaven. The rest will go to the umbral or the dark abyss, which is the purgatory. So you're talking 30% of, maybe 7 billion good spirits versus they've got to take care of, of how many, right? Quite a lot of us here on Earth, 7 billion here on Earth, and you've got another 7 billion of other spirits. So they're outnumbered more than 2 to 1, right? A third, less than a third, actually. So, and then they're actually working, and it's not like they're working at a classroom with a teacher saying, oh, I'll take 30 students. No, they're actually trying to work with us almost one at a time. Now, these high spirits can do multitasking. They do many, many great things, but just think of the amount of work. This is why the spirit world keeps giving us these messages. They want us to rise. There's going to be plenty of jobs there for anybody that wants to rise in heaven. If you want to help people, they want you. There's plenty of jobs. You're not ever going to be unemployed in heaven because there's so many people here that need help. And there's, and of course you'll love what you're doing. And then of course the most wonderful spirits are probably those that go down into the dark abyss and tries to help people, one by one. It must be a very tough job. Then he goes on, he goes, well, are there any hospitals similar to this in the realm of half belief? Which I think he means that like the lower zone. He says, yes, but for a different kind of case. Many people who suffered from mind troubles on earth come to that realm. They fall into 2 divisions. Those whose minds were unable to work owing to some physical defect, and those whose minds themselves were affected. The first group may be subdivided into those whose physical defects, being present from birth, prevented all development, and those whose minds, having developed, were suddenly unhinged by some physical accident. The latter need but little treatment, but the other groups need treatment with, in some cases, measured by Earth times, seems very long. So for all those, and I've thought about this myself, right? I always thought, okay, I wonder, when I die, am I still me? But what happens if, and I've seen people like that, right? They've had like a bicycle accident where a car hits them and they hit their head, and they're not the same at all. They're, God bless them, but they went through. They're just not the same people. And so are you different when you die and now you're in heaven, but you're more of this vegetable or not as smart as you were before, or whatever happened to you? The answer is no. That is only affecting your physical brain. Your spirit brain is connected to your physical brain by the perispirit. So therefore, you are still you. Your physical brain has been injured, but all of that will go away when you pass over. So if you have a brother or sister or whatever who is, in physically challenged, mentally challenged, they could be a wonderful, intelligent spirit, but for some reason in their previous life, they really damaged their perispirit and they needed to come back in this more challenged state. But they will be just wonderful and able to talk to you like anyone else when they go back in the spirit world. So that's very important to understand. So anyway, he says that sometimes it takes a very long time to help them. And he goes, you shall see these hospitals at another time. We then quickly passed out of the house of refuge into the school and onto the courtyard, then out of the gateway into the darkness out of hell. Thus ended this strange lesson. And then the medium, J.W., said, it was a very extraordinary experience. Do you think that the smaller house of refuge scattered throughout hell has such elaborate arrangements? He says, no, they're just temporary receiving rooms where the rescued are patched up till they can get to one of these great institutions. Which is true. They have a lot of those things. Now, let's talk about another view of one of these small colonies. Now, in the book Action and Reaction, by the spirit Andre Louise, and he dictated this book to the medium Chico Xavier, who's Francisco C. Xavier. You can find Action and Reaction on Amazon, um, and and in your bookstore you can order it, but it's for Chico Xavier. So Andre Louis is visiting a small colony, and more like a fort, right? Because these are located deep in the umbrella. So this is not in hell, but this is in the umbrella, the lower zone. And there it is, its purpose to help those who desire to escape their time in that desolate region. And the center's name is Mansion of Peace. Now, Andre describes that they have weapons that defend the small colony. And the weapons he describes as a series of metallic poles which are charged to repel any attacks. And he witnesses one attack, like this army of spirits trying to get in. This is you can see when people have had these visions, these really dystopian visions of the afterlife, there's people can see different things depending on what level they're at. And Andre Louis goes, "Are we being attacked by an army?" And then his guide there, Drusio, says, yes, we are. These attacks are common, however. Our unfortunate brothers are trying to force us to move our building and render us powerless so they can take over the region. Again, a truth that people need to know is that purgatory, which is below, and the lower zone, they're organized. They're organized in small cities. They have mines. They have factories. They have armies. They have mafia type bosses, right? Now, they're horrible places, and the people in charge are like the mafia crime bosses, where you do something wrong, they'll try to punish you. They can't kill you, but they can sure make life horrible for you. So, and he says that the attackers are equipped with cannons that discharge harmful vibrations that would cause terror and madness if it weren't for the defenses of the fort. Now, this illustrates that indeed some type of organized criminal groupings are present. And so wherever there's control by criminals, there exists a need for them to enslave the weak and the feeble. And there are always legions of henchmen ready to do their bidding in the hopes of rising to the top one day. And the presence of cannons, which are capable of spreading fear, notice it's not about physically harming you, it's mentally harming you. So it's a whole different, paradigm in the spirit world in these lower levels. Now, also remember, if you're in this lower level, you can't go up. It's the law of affinity. Higher spirits can go from their level down to wherever they want to, but you cannot ever go above the level you're at. That's why the rest of heaven's pretty well protected. So there's got to be collectives in the lower zone which can manufacture weapons and other goods. And all of this occurring is like right in front of us. It's all occurring on our doorstep. As we walk, as we drive, as we work, we are swimming in the same space as the lower zone. We just can't see it. We cannot detect that plane. We have been given a subset of the senses needed to see all this, so we can concentrate and exist in our physical world, so we can learn lessons we need to learn. And of course, in that area, right, where we walk and work, there's millions of forlorn and discarded creatures emanating negative thoughts and energy. So think about this. We are living in an atmosphere charged with rays designed to bring us down, to make us sad, down to their level. And that's why we have to struggle daily with keeping our heads uplifted and not being nervous and anxious. But think about this. Why? Well, think about basic training, right? Where you see, let's say these movies where guys are climbing or crawling through the mud with a machine gun, under barbed wire, machine guns firing over on top of them, so they can understand what it's like to live in a combat zone. The same thing here. When we are being trained, right? When we are being higher and higher spirits, we're going to have to go down into these levels and be with all of these spirits and know that what they're thinking, and know it for us to use our minds to filter all that out and just grasp what's important at that particular time. We are being trained. So, and on this plan of atonement, where we must pay for our past wrongs and we must expiate our mistakes. But while doing so, we live in an atmosphere where at any time we can bring in adverse forces to kick us off the right path. And therefore, in order to succeed in our trials, we must demonstrate pure dedication in our hearts and minds to a life, to living a life deserving our entrance to a celestial city, to a heavenly city. So now let's go where he's going to visit a college. So he goes, I found myself standing on an eminence, and beneath me I could see the towers and roof of the college, and this must be one of the levels of heaven, where I knew HGL dwelt. And then he was standing beside me again. Well, would you like to see that college? He goes, yes. So we began to descend the slope. And as we went, I said, and it's my wife, asked me to ask you whether you could give her information concerning the lighter side of life on this plane, your recreations, and so forth. For I presume you're not always learning lessons. He goes, well, this meeting shall be devoted to that subject. I will show you something, though only a glimpse of that side of life here. We now reached the college and paused in front of the gate. The gate was not in the center as I expected, but towards the southeast corner. I call it by this name, for I saw the east window of the chapel in a decorated style over the great gateway behind the roof of the first line of buildings. This great gate, instead of a tower, had a gable roof with the end of the gable towards the quad and the side which we entered. The roof of the chapel was similarly high-pitched. The east window of the chapel was apparently in a decorated style, and over the great gateway were three long windows, the center one having a little tracery and one mullion. The entrance to the hall, instead of being high in the middle of the line of the buildings, was at the northwest corner. For the rest, I need not go into much detail, as in the main it followed the lines of the usual college building. So remember, as you're seeing these buildings were not made by people making bricks, quarrying stones, physically putting things on each other. They were made by a group of spirits who, amongst themselves, decided on the architecture and the plan, and they created these with their mind. So these are higher spirits than the ones probably on this level. And they created these for the use of the people on this level. And they created these buildings in an architecture where they would feel comfortable and familiar with. Again, that's what the spirit world does, is when we go over from our physical world to the real world, the spirit world, we are made to feel comfortable. So it's not so totally different. Because if you really think about it, things are very different, but they don't appear different to us because we see what we expect to see. And our mind then is affected by the superior spirits, and the spirits are all on our same level by their thoughts. And then we all collectively see this vision of normality. And we feel like we are ourselves, when actually that's just our paraspirit, our covering of what we think we look like. As you go higher and higher, you don't even need that anymore. You become more and more energy. But this is what is awaiting for us. And just to give you a taste of what other people have said, in the Reverend Owen's book, in The Life Beyond the Veil, which I have written a series of 3 books all about his books, which are just, his books are fascinating. And what I did is I took his books and I categorized them, and then I used his information, and I took information from other spiritist literature and said, okay, this is how an English reverend in the early 1900s was talked to by spirits, right? And then this is what other ones like Allan Kardec in the 1850s in France, Chico Xavier in Brazil, Camilo Branco in Portugal, Divaldo Franco in Brazil. This is what they saw, and this is the similarities, and it gives you a little bit different pictures of life, and and it also gives you the fact that from 1850 all the way up. I think the last book, I reference is like 2004 or 5. I can't remember. Planetary Transition by Divaldo Franco. Hell, the message stays the same, and sometimes we're told a little bit more. Sometimes we're a little bit light. Kind of shines on this one. It gives us a better explanation. And there's just, because look, trying to do this is like peering through a keyhole and trying to figure out what heaven's like. And I'm sure we see so little, but what we do see is just fascinating. And the more you can understand this, It just gets you excited that, okay, yeah, this isn't a big deal. This might be fun, right? If you're ready for it. So let's talk about his mother, what his G. Vaughan's mother tells him about a great college building that served to study color. So here's an example of a college, not by this author of Gone West, but by the Reverend G. Vaughan's mother, who was a spirit talking to her son. So she and a group encountered a large building which had a series of dome, pinnacles, and turrets. And they were invited to learn what was happening in that building. And from the outside, the edifices appeared opaque. But when they walked inside, the walls seemed semi-transparent. As they proceeded from hall to hall, they found that each was filled with a slightly different color shade, a color theme, right? Each hall had a separate color and with subtle changes of hues on the walls. Now, contrast with what I just read before, which is more of a college you find on Earth. So this outpost where he's visiting on Earth is very on the higher level of the lower zone or on some little level of the lower zone. Whereas G. Vaughan's mother is probably a little bit higher level of heaven, and the architecture is more fantastic, more diverse, right? So the walls are semi-transparent, and the colors can change, etc. So as you get higher and higher, there are more capabilities and more attributes that you can perceive, and that will be done because you're able to understand them, and you won't lose your comfort zone with these changes. So then Reverend G. Vaughan's mother describes some of the halls. Because one of these great halls was the Orange Hall, and in it were all the tints of that primary, from the faintest of light gold to the deepest of deep orange. Another was the Red Hall, where hues were ambient all about us, from the faintest rose leaf pink to the deepest crimson of the rose or the lilac. Another, the Violet Hall, was radiant with hues ranging from the most delicate heliotrope or amethyst to the dark, rich hue of the pansy. And now I must tell you that there were not only more, but several more of these halls devoted to those tints which you don't know, but what you call ultraviolet and ultra red, and most wonderful they are. So what is she telling us? She's telling us everything is studied and analyzed in the spirit domain. Learning never ceases. Imagine the scope of professions which can be found in the vast spirit universe. If you are a painter or a designer who loves to work with colors, just think of the expanded boundaries you'll encounter when you're back on the other side. Now, this research is not only for beauty, but for more. This is what Reverend G. Vaughan's mother tells us. You are wondering to what purpose these buildings of crystal are put. They are for studying the effect of colors as applied to different departments of life, animal, vegetable, and even mineral life. But the two former chiefly together with clothing. For both the texture and hue of our garments take their quality from the spiritual state and the character of the wearer. Our environment is part of us, just as with you, and light is one component and an important one of our environment. Therefore, it is very powerful in its applications under certain conditions, as we saw it in these halls. I am told, this is what his mother said, that the results of these studies are handed on to those who have charge of trees and other plant life on Earth and other planets. But there are other results which are too rare in nature for such application to the grosser environment of Earth and the other planets. So, of course, only a very small part of these studies is handed in your direction, meaning towards Earth. So again, by another person, she's telling us the spirit universe is vast and populated by a multitude of levels of spirits and the human-like incarnates, all toiling on diverse planets to become pure spirits, all work together for the betterment of us all. And then when I talk here, I talk a lot about Earth and the levels of heaven and the lower zone, the dark abyss around Earth. But we are just one small, tiny data point. There are planets within our solar system. There are planets full of life. Now, we can't see it. They exist on different dimensions. So they're still in a physical material plane, but they're in a different dimension of a aspect of a material plane. And then there are spirit locations all throughout space. Space is completely crowded. Now, you can think of it this way, and you can think of Earth and roundness and up and down and sideways and north and south. And that helps us, our our incarnate, our human minds orient ourselves to where things are. But in actuality, it's a huge, I don't know exactly what it is, but I think the better thing is thinking of it as a huge database, a matrix of information. And if you're this spirit personality, you're the spirit character, and you have certain attributes, and you're allowed to see certain things, and you have different effects of physical laws depending on which dimension you're placed into. And if you then rise into heaven, what's really happening is that your attributes and your list of tools, right, and your list of ability to gather data or peer into the database is increased. Here on Earth, we're very, parameterized. And in fact, the spirits will say, it said to Reverend Duval, okay, well, when you think of distance, it's not the same. It's either present or absent. So think about that for a second. Distance in the spirit world isn't, it's 5 miles to the next city. It's either present or absent. Now, in the spirit world, there's no speed of light, right? And you move about if you wish. You can walk, you can take horse carriages, people do that, into these environments that are created by logic. But you think of yourself into this video game where you're in this wonderful landscape and you're walking along, right? And this is, think of this two-dimensional video game. But that avatar, which let's say is you, isn't really walking anywhere. They are seeing different states around them. That's what we actually do. We see different states around them. We detect different states, and we can communicate at only within the levels that we are allowed to. So anyway, I don't want to get too far into it because then it makes, we'll let people think of that if they want. And if you want to think of it better as you ascend to heaven, and to us, it is real. It feels real. That's why when people die, they think, I'm not dead, but then I go to my home and no one listens to me. No one pays attention to me because they think they're they're alive. They feel themselves that they don't know they can't die, but they're not dead. I'm not dead. I'm breathing. And, sometimes I'm hungry and thirsty, although they don't really need it, but they think they are. So therefore they are. So anyway, I'll leave that with you. Now, next we'll get more into the games and the recreations the spirits play, which will be seen by our wonderful J.S.M, the medium, as he talks to the spirits in the world as he sees it. So anyway, I want to say, God bless everybody. Go forth, check out my website, nwspiritism.com. If you're interested, read my book, Heaven and Below, book 1. You can, in book 2 is Spirits and Spirit Attributes. In book 3 is How We Are Guided by Spirits. In it, the spirits have told Reverend J. Bowen what the earth will be like far into the future. And I mean far, right? You're not going to see it this lifetime. Not going to happen as quick as you would like to, but you will see it if you're still on this planet and you are progressing. Anyway, I want to say, everyone, God bless you.